Ethan's fingers tightened around his pencil. He skimmed each sentence, his heartbeat quickening. No mistakes. No mistakes. But the panic didn't leave. A sharp knot twisted in his stomach, curling tighter and tighter. His breath hitched. His chest clenched like an iron fist had wrapped around his ribs, squeezing. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, his vision edged with static. Not now. Not now. He dropped the pencil, pressing his palms against his temples. He needed to stop this, needed to snap out of it before. The floor rushed up to meet him. His knees hit the hardwood with a dull thud. His fingers clawed at the fabric of his shirt as his lungs locked, refusing to expand. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. He wasn't sure. Then, suddenly, release. A rush of air flooded his chest, sharp and sudden. His vision cleared, the room reassembling itself in front of him. What the hell was that? Ethan pushed himself up, his breath unsteady. He couldn't afford this. Couldn't afford to be weak. Not with practice in an hour, not with his father watching. The kitchen smelled of coffee and eggs, but the tension in the air drowned out any sense of warmth. Ethan hesitated at the doorway. He caught sight of his father sitting at the kitchen table, posture rigid, tie knotted perfectly, reading the morning paper. A calculated moment. A deep breath. Then he stepped inside. Ryan didn't look up. "Breakfast is on the counter," he said, voice clipped. Ethan moved toward the plate without a word. Eggs, whole wheat toast, a banana. The exact ratio of protein and carbs needed for an athlete's optimal performance. Perfectly balanced, scientifically ideal. But nothing he actually wanted. He forced down a bite, chewing mechanically. "You ready for practice?" Ethan swallowed. His throat felt dry. "I am," he said finally, the words even, controlled. His father folded the newspaper, setting it aside with deliberate care. "You better be." The tension coiled in Ethan's stomach like a spring wound too tight. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Ryan Carter's approval wasn't given. It was earned, and even then it came in measured doses. Ethan set down his fork. He didn't taste the food. He didn't need to. He had an hour to prove himself, and no room for mistakes. The sun was already beating down on the field, casting long shadows across the neatly cut grass. The air smelled of sweat and damp earth. The steady rhythm of cleats pounding against the turf filled Ethan's ears as he wove through the cones, the ball glued to his feet. Precision, control, speed. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Faster, smarter, better. He executed just like always. The passes, the pivots, the perfect angles. On the surface it was automatic. But inside, something was boiling. It started as an ember in his chest, small, flickering. A feeling he could almost ignore. But as the morning wore on, it grew. Tighter, hotter. Not exhaustion, not frustration. Something else. Ethan clenched his teeth, shoving the feeling down. He wouldn't let it stop him. Not here. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. The whistle blew, the scrimmage started. Ethan moved like a shadow, cutting through defenders, intercepting passes. The field was familiar. His second home, the one place he never failed. But then he saw him, Ryan Carter, arms crossed, jaw set, watching. Ethan's pulse spiked. He forced his focus back on the game, but the weight of his father's gaze pressed into him, heavier than the summer heat. Judging, measuring, expecting. And then it happened. A fraction of a second too late. A pass that should have been clean. But it wasn't. The opposing team snatched the ball, surging forward in a blur of motion. Ethan recovered fast, but not fast enough. The damage was done. And his father saw. The ember in his chest flared into fire. His breathing hitched. Not now, not now. A water bottle landed at his feet. Someone had thrown it to him. He grabbed it, chugging down the water like it could wash away his mistake. But it didn't. Nothing ever did. The drive home was suffocating. Ethan sat motionless in the passenger seat, still in his sweaty uniform, his fingers gripping the hem of his shorts. Outside, the world blurred past, houses, trees, the occasional streetlight flickering in the evening haze. Ryan Carter's hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white, jaw clenched. The car was silent, but Ethan knew what was coming. He could feel it, thick in the air, pressing against his chest. Then, "What was that?" Ryan's voice was sharp, slicing through the silence like a blade. Ethan swallowed. "What was what?" Ryan scoffed, shaking his head. "That first half." "I fixed it," Ethan muttered, staring out the window. "That's not the point," Ryan snapped. "You lost control. You acted weak." The words hit harder than any insult. Weak. That was the worst thing Ethan could be in his father's eyes. His stomach twisted. He wanted to argue, wanted to say something, anything, but his voice felt stuck in his throat. The berating continued all the way home. Ethan's mother, Elsie, was waiting in the kitchen when they walked in, and she didn't even have to ask. She could see it in Ethan's posture, in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Ryan," she said, voice low, "enough." Ryan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "No, not enough. I don't know what's happening to him, but he was never this," he exhaled sharply, "this weak." Ethan's breath caught. There it was again, that word. Elsie's eyes darkened. "Maybe something is happening to him, Ryan." Ryan shook his head. "You want to baby him? Coddle him? What, therapy? You think sitting around talking to strangers is going to fix him?" Elsie sighed, rubbing her temples. "Not just therapy, a care animal, something structured, something that forces him to slow down. Equine therapy." Ryan snorted. "Horses? Seriously?" "Animals don't judge," Elsie said, crossing her arms. "They don't expect perfection. They don't bark orders. They just react to what's real." Ryan hesitated. Ethan held his breath. He was sure his father would reject it. Call it soft. Call it pointless. But Ryan only stared at him for a long moment. He didn't like the idea of therapy, but he hated the idea of his son failing even more. The next day they drove to the therapy center. The therapy center smelled of earth and hay, the crisp scent of fresh-cut grass drifting in through the open stable doors. Sunlight spilled across the arena in golden streaks, catching dust motes that hung in the air like tiny fireflies. Ethan barely noticed. His pulse pounded in his ears as he adjusted himself on the sleek black horse, Atlas. The animal stood still, too still, except for the occasional flick of an ear, as if listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. His coat gleamed under the light, his dark eyes unreadable. Horses could sense emotions. That's what Laura, the instructor, had said, even the ones people tried to hide. Which meant Atlas already knew Ethan was nervous, knew he didn't belong here, knew he was weak. "All right," Laura said, stepping beside them. Her voice was gentle, but firm. "Atlas isn't looking for perfection, Ethan. He just needs to trust you." Trust. The word sat heavy in Ethan's chest. He nodded stiffly, adjusting his grip on the lead rope. His fingers curled too tightly around it, the way they clenched his bed sheets at night, when he couldn't breathe. A few feet away his father stood motionless, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Ryan Carter hadn't wanted to be here. His silence said as much. He didn't believe in therapy. He didn't believe in weakness. And right now, he didn't believe in Ethan. Ethan could feel the weight of that judgment pressing into his spine, wrapping around his ribs like a vice. "Go ahead," Laura encouraged. "Just nudge him, and he'll follow." Ethan let out a slow breath. His fingers trembled as he tapped the horse's side. Atlas hesitated, just for a second. Ethan's stomach twisted. Did he do it wrong? Was he too weak? He nudged again, harder this time, too hard. Atlas flicked an ear, shifted his weight, hesitated, and just like that, Ethan knew he was failing, knew Atlas could feel it, knew his father was watching. Ryan exhaled sharply from the sidelines, shaking his head. "For God's sake, Ethan," he muttered, "it's only a horse." The words sliced through the air like a whip. Ethan's stomach lurched. The pressure in his chest, that ember, that fire, that unbearable weight, it snapped. His breathing shut down. The world tilted. His pulse pounded in his skull. His vision blurred. Not now, not now. Atlas felt it before anyone else did. The horse stiffened, ears pinned back, tail flicked sharply through the air. Then, chaos. A sharp cry, a blur of motion. Atlas reared onto his hind legs, muscles coiling like a spring. Ethan barely had time to register what was happening before he was airborne. For one weightless second, everything slowed. The world tilted. The blue sky filled his vision. Then, impact. A shock wave of pain exploded through his ribs as he hit the ground. The air ripped from his lungs. People screamed. He gasped, but no air came. His chest locked. His vision darkened. Everything had gone wrong. Was he dying? Ethan clawed at the dirt, his fingers grasping for something, anything to anchor him. His chest was locked, his lungs refusing to pull in air. His vision blurred at the edges. His pulse hammered in his skull. Ryan loomed over him, his voice sharp, cutting. What the hell was that? Not worry, not concern, just frustration. Ethan tried to answer, but nothing came out. His body wouldn't listen. His father took a step closer, his shadow blocking out the sun. "Get up!" Ryan snapped. "Now!" But Ethan couldn't, and for the first time, someone else saw it. A hand shot out, firm and unyielding. "Laura!" "Coach Carter, back off!" Ryan's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me?" Laura ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside Ethan, her voice steady, even. "Ethan, look at me." Somehow he did. "You're having a panic attack," she murmured. "I need you to breathe with me." Her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't demanding. It was soft, grounding. Ethan's entire body shook, his ribs tight, as if something invisible was crushing him. Laura inhaled deeply, slow and controlled. "Follow me, in through the nose." Ethan tried, failed, tried again, out through the mouth. His throat burned, but his lungs finally obeyed. A shallow inhale, then another. Laura placed a hand lightly on his back. "You're okay. You are safe." Safe. Ethan blinked. The world wasn't collapsing. He was still here. His pulse began to slow. His vision cleared. The crushing weight in his chest eased, just slightly. Ryan stood frozen, his face unreadable. Laura turned toward him, her gaze sharp as a blade. "He's not fine," she said, "and he's not weak. He's drowning, and you're the one pushing him under." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Ryan's jaw clenched, his mouth opening, but no sound came out, because she was right. Atlas stood a few feet away, ears pricked forward, watching. The animal had known before anyone else. Ryan looked back at his son. For years he had seen the straight-A student, the athlete, the kid who always got back up. But now he saw someone exhausted, cracking, drowning under the weight of expectations, and for the first time, Ryan wasn't angry. He was afraid. His voice came out quieter than he expected. "I didn't know." Laura's expression didn't soften. "Maybe you never gave him the space to tell you." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Ryan never forgot that moment, because it changed him. A week later, Ryan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The man who never broke, the man who fixed things. But what if he was the thing that was broken? At 8 a.m. sharp, he got up. He found Ethan in the kitchen, still groggy, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Ryan cleared his throat. "Ready?" Ethan blinked at him. "For what?" "The stables. We're doing this together." For a moment, Ethan just stared. Then, slowly, something shifted in his face. A flicker of something Ryan hadn't seen in years. Hope. The drive to the center was silent. Ethan stared out the window. Ryan kept his hands tight on the wheel. There were 1,000 things Ryan could say, But it was Ethan who finally spoke. "Do you ever get scared?" Ryan frowned. "What?" Ethan didn't look at him. "Like, when you were my age, did you ever get scared of messing up?" Ryan's first instinct was to say no, to remind Ethan that fear is weakness, that failure is just a stepping stone. But he knew better now. Ryan glanced at his son, at the way his fingers clenched his bag, as if they were the only thing keeping him upright. "Yeah," he admitted, "all the time." Ethan didn't react, but something shifted. When they arrived, neither of them spoke. They just rode. No forced conversations, no lectures, just silence. But somewhere in that silence, Ethan started talking, not about soccer, not about school, but about everything else. The way his chest tightened when he felt like he was failing. The way his mind raced at night, replaying every mistake. And for once, Ryan listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't try to fix it. He just listened. By the fifth session, Laura didn't need to guide them anymore. They rode independently, Ethan leading Atlas with confidence, Ryan following on another horse. For years, Ryan thought strength meant never breaking. But maybe strength was something else entirely. Maybe it was knowing when to let go. He exhaled, his chest light for the first time in years. He may not have all the answers, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the questions. "Ethan," Ryan began hesitantly. Ethan turned his head, curious. Ryan swallowed. This was harder than he thought. "I've been so busy trying to make sure you never fail," he admitted, "that I forgot to ask if you were okay." The words hung in the air. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected that. Ryan let out a slow breath. I'm sorry for pushing you so hard." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then his shoulders relaxed. "I always thought if I did everything right, you'd be proud of me," Ethan said quietly. "But I needed more than that. I needed you to see me, not just the scores, the goals, or the perfect grades, me." The silence stretched between them, thick, raw. Ryan's throat felt tight. His chest ached with something he hadn't felt in years. He reached out, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "I see you now," he said softly. "I promise you, I see you now." And for the first time in years, Ethan believed him. For years, Ethan believed that falling meant failure, that weakness meant letting people down, that if he wasn't perfect, he wasn't enough. But the day he fell, that was the day everything changed. Because Atlas didn't throw him to hurt him. Atlas threw him to save him. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't the only one learning a lesson. His father, a man who had spent his life demanding strength, finally understood what it really meant. And Ethan, who had spent years carrying the weight of perfection, realized he didn't have to carry it alone. It makes you wonder, how often do we mistake struggle for weakness? How many people around us are carrying a weight no one else can see? And if we truly paid attention, what would we notice that's been right in front of us all along? Did Ethan's story make you reflect on anything in your own life? Have you ever felt the pressure to be perfect? Or have you ever realized too late that someone you love was struggling? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss what's next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.